"You're not going anywhere." The voice cut through the quiet morning like a warning. I stopped, my heart pounding. My morning jog, a daily ritual of peace and routine, suddenly felt foreign, even threatening. The streets were unusually still, the city wrapped in pre-dawn silence. I'd been running this route for years, always appreciating the solitude. But today something about the air felt off. Up ahead, a man stood on the path. He was dressed in dark clothing, his face partially hidden in the shadows. He wasn't moving, just watching. A van was parked nearby, its engine idling softly. My gut told me to keep moving, to act normal, but my body didn't seem to agree. I slowed to a stop, glancing around for anyone else, but there was no one. "Everything okay?" I called out, forcing my voice to sound steady. He didn't answer. Instead, he began walking toward me. I backed up instinctively, the weight of unease growing heavier with every step he took. "Do you need something?" I asked, my voice tightening, still no response. He stopped a few feet away, his expression calm but unreadable. "Come with me," he said. "What?" I asked, confused and alarmed. "You'll understand soon," he replied, his voice low but certain. I looked at him, then at the van. The open door revealed nothing but shadows inside. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, trying to keep my voice even. He stepped closer, his gaze steady. "Just come with me. It's important." I hesitated, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to run, but something about the way he spoke rooted me in place. Against my better judgment, I followed him to the van. The door slid shut with a soft thud as we stepped inside. The vehicle began to move, the sound of the tires humming against the road. I sat in silence, my thoughts spinning. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "You'll see," he said simply. I stared at him, searching for answers in his expression, but his face remained calm, unreadable. The world outside the van seemed to blur, and before I realized it, my eyes grew heavy. My head felt foggy, my thoughts slipping away. When I woke up, everything was different. I was in a small room, its concrete walls bare and cold. A narrow bed sat in the corner, and the heavy door had no handle. I stood on unsteady legs, still disoriented, and looked around. The air was cold and carried a faint, clinical smell. I pressed my hands against the door, pulling at its edges, but it didn't budge. "Let me out!" I shouted, slamming my fists against the door. The dull thuds echoed back at me, mocking my desperation. My screams turned into guttural cries as I pounded and kicked the door, but it didn't budge. Hours seemed to pass, or maybe it was minutes. Time felt meaningless in this concrete tomb. Just as my voice started to give out, I heard it, a soft metallic clink. The door creaked open, and there he was. The same man in the black jumpsuit and ski mask stepped inside, his towering frame blocking my only escape. I didn't think. I charged at him, fists clenched, aiming to overpower him. But the moment I collided with him, his grip clamped down on my arms like iron shackles. My strength was nothing against his. "Nice try," he muttered coldly, shoving me back like I weighed nothing. I stumbled but didn't fall, my heart pounding in my ears as his dark eyes burned into mine through the mask. As I stood there, catching my breath, a bitter thought crept in. At least I wasn't tied up. My body was free to move, even if it wouldn't do me much good. I glanced down at myself. My year-old frame, slightly chubby from years of indulgent living, wasn't exactly built for heroics. They probably saw me as no threat, an aging woman past her prime. But him? He was the opposite. I couldn't help but notice his broad shoulders and the rippling muscles that strained against his black jumpsuit. He moved with the fluid confidence of someone who knew he was in control. Even through the mask, his piercing black eyes were sharp, assessing me like a hawk sizing up prey. He had to be young, in his S or S, and then it hit me. This wasn't random. They must have taken me for ransom. My heart skipped a beat as the realization set in. Of course, that had to be it. My husband, Charles, owns a successful grocery mart chain, well, several, and other business ventures. Our life in the wealthy suburbs was no secret. But how much did they know? I studied him again, trying to gauge if he was the type to talk. His silence was unnerving, like he knew my mind was racing, but enjoyed watching me connect the dots. "Is this about money?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound composed. "If it is, you don't need to do this. Just tell me what you want, and we can work something out." His only response was a slow tilt of his head, the barest hint of amusement in his eyes. "Sit down," he said, his deep voice cutting through the air like a blade. I reluctantly lowered myself onto the worn-out chair, its creaking protests mirroring the dread building inside me. The man towered over me, his presence suffocating as he finally spoke. "Charlotte," he said, his voice smooth but chilling. Hearing my name fall from his lips sent a shiver down my spine. Of course he knew my name. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment capturing, it was meticulously planned. He paced the room slowly, his hands clasped behind his back like a predator enjoying the control. "As you probably guessed," he continued, "we'll be calling your husband, and we'll be asking for a small fortune in return for your safety." His tone remained unnervingly calm, but the number he casually mentioned hit me like a heavy blow. $1 million, he said, as though it were just another simple request. My stomach tightened. $1 million. It was an astronomical sum. Sure, we had money, but not the kind of money you could pull together that quickly. Most of our wealth was tied up in investments, properties, and long-term assets. I opened my mouth to argue, but before I could, he pulled a phone from his pocket and dialed a number. I didn't need to see the screen to know exactly who he was calling. "Charles Parker," he said when the line connected. My husband's voice came through sharp with confusion and concern. "Who is this?" "What's going on?" The man didn't bother with introductions. "Your wife is with us. We want $1 million. You have ours." A pause. The silence was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in Charles's head, the panic setting in. I don't have that kind of money on hand," Charles stammered. "Please let me." The man cut him off sharply. "Figure it out." Then he shifted the phone to loudspeaker and thrust it toward me. "Talk to him." He ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I leaned toward the phone. "Charles," I sobbed, my voice trembling. "Please, you have to save me. I'm so scared, Charlotte." Charles's voice cracked with desperation. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" The man snatched the phone back before I could answer, muting Charles's frantic questions with a press of a button. "Tick-tock, Mr. Parker," he said flatly. "You know what happens if you don't deliver?" The man ended the call with a sharp tap on the screen, the sound cutting through the silence like a warning. My heart raced as I stared at him, searching for any hint of what would happen next. "What happens if he can't come through?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling, but still trying to keep some semblance of composure. He turned to face me, his gaze unwavering cold. "You'll find out," he replied, a small, unsettling smile, tugging at the corners of his lips. "Actually, I misspoke. You won't find out, but your husband, he'll be right there watching." He chuckled, then a hollow sound that sent a chill down my spine. The door slammed behind him, and I heard the lock click into place with a finality that made my stomach drop. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. The room felt even more oppressive. Now, no windows, no light, nothing but the sound of my own breath. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to calm the chaos in my mind. Hours, a day that felt both too short and impossibly long. How could Charles, with everything tied up in business deals and investments, possibly raise that much money in such a short time? Panic gnawed at me as I thought of what would happen if he couldn't. I sank to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees, trying to find some comfort in the cold, hard space around me. My thoughts, despite my best efforts to push them away, drifted back to last night. It hadn't been anything significant, really. Just another in a series of small arguments that had become more frequent over the past year. Charles had been increasingly distant, consumed by work and his growing business empire. Our conversations had become nothing more than functional exchanges, talk of bills, errands, and the occasional polite check-in. I tried to keep myself occupied, jogging through the neighborhood, picking up crochet, even binge-watching crime dramas on TV. But it wasn't enough. A woman has needs, emotional needs, physical needs, the need to feel seen and valued. So last night, I finally voiced my frustration. "Charles, it's like I don't even exist to you anymore," I'd said, my voice tinged with hurt and exasperation. "When was the last time we even had dinner together, just the two of us?" He'd sighed heavily, barely looking up from his laptop. "Charlotte, you know how busy things have been. I'm doing this for us, for our future." "For us?" "It doesn't feel like it's for us. It feels like it's for you and your damn empire," I'd snapped back. It wasn't a shouting match, just a strained, tired exchange between two people who had once been deeply in love, but were now orbiting separate worlds. And now, here I was, locked in a windowless room, wondering if that distance between us would seal my fate. Would he move heaven and earth to save me? Or had I become just another task on his endless to-do list? I crossed my fingers, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. Maybe this whole nightmare would prove something, whether Charles still cared enough to fight for me. For now, all I could do was hope. I paced the room, my thoughts spiraling and my body betraying me. Hunger clawed at my stomach, my mouth was parched, and my leggings, already torn, felt like a second insult to my dignity. The stress built like a knot in my chest, and to top it off, the pressure to pee was becoming unbearable. An hour crawled by. Finally, the door creaked open and another man stepped in. This one was different. Though his ski mask concealed his face, I could see the pale skin around his eyes. He was white. His demeanor wasn't as menacing, but his presence still sent a shiver down my spine. "Please," I begged, my voice cracking. "At least let me use the bathroom. I can't take this anymore." He didn't even hesitate. No leaving this room. I stared at him in disbelief as he turned on his heel and left the room. When he came back moments later, he was carrying a bucket. "Here," he said flatly, placing it on the floor. "Do your business in this." I froze my mind, reeling with humiliation and anger. "What is this? Am I an animal to you?" He didn't react. He simply sat down on the sofa, his eyes fixed on me with a mix of indifference and mild amusement. My body screamed for relief, but my pride kept me rooted to the spot. I tried to hold it in to maintain some shred of dignity, but nature is relentless, and soon I had no choice. With trembling hands, I turned my back to him and used the bucket. The sound of my shame echoed in the small room, and I wanted to disappear. He didn't look away. If anything, his gaze grew more intense, as if he found this whole situation entertaining. When I finished, he got up, grabbed the bucket, and left without a word. Moments later, he returned, this time with a sandwich and a bottle of water. He set them down on the small table in front of me and sat back on the sofa, watching. I didn't care how I looked or what he thought anymore. I lunged for the food like a starving animal, devouring the sandwich in seconds and gulping down the water until my throat stopped burning. As the food settled in my stomach, I felt the faintest glimmer of relief. It was strange, humbling even, how much comfort something as simple as a sandwich and water could bring. I realized how often I took these basic needs for granted. For a brief moment, I was content. The man's voice broke the silence. "How old are you?" I glanced at him warily, unsure of where this was going. I muttered. He tilted his head as if sizing me up. "You look younger," he said casually, his tone almost conversational. For a split second, I felt a strange sense of flattery, but then reality hit me hard. I swallowed the urge to cry and bit out. "What's the point of all this small talk? Are you rubbing salt in my wounds now?" He leaned back in the chair, the amusement gone from his eyes. "No, I'm not trying to make you feel worse," he said softly. "I'm just not a bad person. I just need money to survive." I scoffed bitterly. "Yeah, $1 million to survive. Seems like you're after more than that. You're after a fortune." He didn't flinch, just shrugged. "This is supposed to be the last job before we quit, actually." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "So I'm your last big score before you retire in luxury?" He looked at me, his gaze surprisingly calm. "I'm sorry it's causing you this much trouble, really, but it's not personal." I shook my head, fighting back the bitter taste in my mouth. "Oh, it's no problem," I said sarcastically, the words practically tasting like poison. Then, with a sudden burst of frustration, I snapped. "Your partner already warned my husband that if he doesn't come up with the money, you'll end my life. So don't sit there pretending you're some kind of saint." His expression flickered for a second, and then he sighed, leaning forward. That was just to scare him. get him to act fast. We didn't mean it." I let out a short laugh, but it was more out of disbelief than humor. "Right. You guys are not assailants, just some guys who kidnap people for a living." He didn't respond to that. Instead, he just stared at me for a moment, the silence stretching between us like a thick rope. The tension in the room was suffocating, but I couldn't stop myself from thinking, how much longer could I last in this game? The guy left the room, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a tiny sliver of relief. The humiliation of earlier lingered in the back of my mind, but my body, grateful for the food and water, was too exhausted to hold on to it. Slowly, I sank onto the hard bed, curling up and letting the weight of everything pull me into an uneasy sleep. The sound of the door clicking open jolted me awake. My heart immediately raced as I sat up, squinting into the dim light. Both of them were there this time. Together, they filled the small room with an imposing presence, their masks still firmly in place. "How long was I out?" I asked, my voice hoarse from sleep. The one who had dragged me into this nightmare was the first to answer. "A good 8 hours," he said, his tone flat. As if that was a perfectly normal thing to say to someone they'd captured 8 hours, I blinked, trying to process the fact that I'd been out that long. My stomach tightened as the man in white chimed in. "That means you've got hours left until your husband has to deliver hours." The number echoed in my head like a ticking clock. I wanted to be hopeful, but doubt crept in. Would Charles even be able to gather that kind of money in time? I swallowed hard, trying not to let the panic show. But then I remembered the other guy's words from before. We didn't mean it. Somehow that reassurance, however small, kept me from completely spiraling. If they weren't planning to do away with me, maybe I still had a chance to get out of this. I glanced at them again, their body language unreadable. I don't know what came over me, but I decided to push my luck. "Why the masks?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "You're already holding me here. You don't need to hide your faces. What's the point?" They exchanged a quick look, one of hesitation, maybe even uncertainty. I couldn't tell what they were thinking, but there was a charged silence between them, as though they were debating whether to indulge me. Finally, the first guy shrugged. "What the hell?" he muttered, reaching up to pull his mask off. The other one followed his lead, tugging his mask free. I wasn't ready for what I saw. They weren't the hardened, scarred crooks I'd been picturing in my head. No menacing tattoos or sinister sneers. They looked normal, strikingly normal, handsome even, the kind of men you'd see at a gym or in line at a coffee shop. The black guy had sharp, chiseled features and deep, expressive eyes that made it impossible to look away. The white guy had a more boyish charm, a clean-shaven face, and a hint of warmth in his piercing blue eyes. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. It was disorienting. My mind scrambled to reconcile their looks with the terrifying situation they'd dragged me into. "You don't look like villains," I said before I could stop myself. The words hung awkwardly in the air, and I half expected them to get angry or defensive. Instead, the white guy chuckled, a low, almost amused sound. "What were you expecting? Horns and fangs?" The black guy leaned against the wall, his expression unreadable. "We don't have to look like monsters to get the job done." There was no arrogance in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. I didn't know what to say next. They were still strangers, still dangerous, but for some reason, seeing their faces made them feel human. Despite the fear thrumming beneath the surface, I felt something else. A strange, unexpected thrill. My life before this had been predictable to the point of suffocation. Wake up, go to work, come home to a husband who barely noticed me, rinse and repeat, no adventure, no spark, no attention. And now, here I was, kidnapped, held in some unknown room by two masked strangers who had just revealed faces that were almost too handsome to believe. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Maybe it was the absurdity of the situation. Or maybe I was losing my mind, spiraling into some twisted version of Stockholm Syndrome. Whatever it was, a part of me didn't want it to stop. I cleared my throat, trying to shake the strange thoughts. "So where exactly am I?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Am I still in Portland?" The black guy, the more serious of the two, narrowed his eyes. "It's better if you don't know," he said flatly. "Right," I muttered. My curiosity gnawed at me, but I let it go for now. I glanced between them, their postures relaxed, but their gazes sharp, always assessing. Something struck me then, a realization that made me sit up straighter. "Aren't you afraid that I've seen your faces now?" I asked. The white guy grinned, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "Not really," he said. His partner smirked, adding, "After we get the money, we're out of here. Europe's waiting for us." Their confidence was unsettling, but their openness was disarming. I studied them for a moment, noticing how they moved, how they interacted. A thought crossed my mind, and before I could stop myself, I blurted it out. "Are you guys partners?" I paused, then clarified with a smirk. "I mean, like a couple for a split second." They both froze, exchanging wide-eyed looks before bursting into laughter. It was genuine, unguarded, and contagious. "Definitely not," the black guy said, shaking his head, his deep voice tinged with amusement. "Not even close." The white guy added, stepping away from him as if to emphasize the point. Their awkward separation made me laugh too, a moment of strange lightheartedness in the middle of a situation that was anything but. The tension in the room shifted. It was still there, lingering beneath the surface, but now there was something else. A weird, almost playful energy. I couldn't help myself. I leaned back on the bed, tilting my head with a sly smile. "You know," I began, my tone dripping with suggestion, "for a couple of guys who say they're not partners, you've got some serious chemistry." The white guy raised an eyebrow, his grin widening. "Oh, really? Is that what you think?" The black guy crossed his arms, his lips twitching as if he were fighting back a smile. "You've got a wild imagination, lady." I shrugged, letting the moment stretch. My own boldness surprised me, but I couldn't stop. There was something freeing about it, about saying things I'd never dare to say in my ordinary life. "Just an observation," I said innocently, though my voice betrayed my amusement. Their reactions were priceless, awkward, amused, and a little flustered. The white guy chuckled, running a hand through his hair, while the black guy shifted his weight, his usual stoic demeanor cracking just slightly. I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift again, charged with something new. I wasn't sure what I was doing, flirting with danger, quite literally. But for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. And they seemed amused by it too, even as they tried to hide it. I leaned forward, lowering my voice to a playful whisper. "So, tell me, who's in charge here? Or is it more of a partnership?" The white guy burst out laughing again, while the black guy rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath. But there was a spark of amusement in his gaze, a glimmer of something unspoken. Whatever this was, it was bizarre and wildly inappropriate. And yet, I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. I leaned back, letting the silence linger for just a moment, building the suspense. Then, with a playful smile, I broke it. "There are still hours left," I said, my tone casual, but with a glint of mischief. "We should make it count. What do you say we play a game to pass the time? I mean, it's not like you guys have anything better to do while we wait, right?" The black guy gave me a wary look, folding his arms. "What kind of game?" The white guy tilted his head, clearly intrigued. "Yeah, what are you thinking?" I grinned, leaning forward slightly. "Well," I said, drawing out the word, "it's always been a bit of a fantasy of mine, being locked in a room with a young man." I paused for effect, letting my words sink in. Their expressions shifted, amused, curious, and a little stunned. "And here I am, not with one, but two young, handsome men. What harm would it do to indulge a little?" The black guy blinked at me, his serious demeanor cracking as he gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Lady," he said, shaking his head, "I didn't realize you were this wild." The white guy, on the other hand, looked thoroughly entertained. His eyes sparkled with amusement, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was considering it, whether as a joke or something more, I couldn't quite tell. I decided to press on, letting the thrill of the moment guide me. "Here's the thing," I continued, my voice soft but insistent. "This game is a little unorthodox, but life's short, isn't it? My husband hasn't paid attention to me in years. It's been so long since we've shared a bed." The room grew quiet, the weight of my words settling over us. I wasn't lying. Not about the neglect, the longing, the ache that had built up over time. "A woman has needs," I said, my tone almost wistful. And sometimes, the universe throws you into the most unexpected situations. Maybe this is one of those times. Maybe this is my moment to make a dream come true, even if it's in the strangest, most twisted way. I looked between them, searching their faces for a reaction. The black guy still seemed skeptical, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or intrigue. The white guy, meanwhile, had a grin that he couldn't quite hide. "You're something else," the white guy said, finally shaking his head, but with a laugh in his voice. "I'm just saying," I replied with a shrug. "You've got me locked in here. What else are we going to do to pass the time? Play cards?" The black guy snorted, rubbing the back of his neck as if he were trying to decide whether this was hilarious, insane, or both. "This is the weirdest kidnapping ever," he muttered. "Maybe," I said, leaning back with a sly smile, "but it doesn't have to be boring." There was a charged silence as they exchanged glances, the air thick with something unspoken. I didn't know what would happen next, whether they'd laugh it off, call my bluff, or take me seriously. I couldn't believe the boldness coursing through me. This wasn't the reserved, predictable woman I knew myself to be. It was as though the tension and surreal nature of the situation had unlocked something primal, something wild. I leaned toward the black guy, his hesitation evident, but there was curiosity in his eyes. When our lips met, it was hesitant at first, a soft exchange, but then the spark ignited and he pulled me closer, his grip firm, his kiss deepening. When we finally broke apart, I turned to the white guy, whose expression was a mix of surprise and eagerness. His hands gently cupped my face as our lips met. There was a kind of pent-up energy that had been building since the moment we first started talking. The three of us sat down, me positioned between them, the air electric with a mix of adrenaline, danger, and an undeniable pull of attraction. This wasn't just about physicality. It was about breaking free, about seizing a moment I never thought I'd have. The room, which once felt suffocating, now hummed with an energy that left me breathless. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly alive. It was reckless, yes, but in that moment, I didn't care. Life had thrown me into chaos, and instead of running from it, I was diving headfirst, embracing the thrill. The room was no longer a prison. It was a stage for a story I'd never forget,